There's a type of person that teachers struggled to grade, that bosses didn't quite know what to do with, and that friends sometimes call too much or all over the place. And almost every major breakthrough in modern history came from exactly that kind of person. What's strange is that we've been measuring human intelligence for over a century, and we still haven't built a system that recognizes this particular kind of mind. Science, however, finally has. It's called creative thinking, and it looks nothing like what most people expect. Today, we're not talking about painting or music or writing poetry. We're talking about a documented cognitive pattern, a specific way the brain generates, connects, and processes information that most standard environments were never designed to support. Here are 10 signs that your brain operates this way, and what that actually means for how you move through the world. Most people find an answer and move on. That's efficient. That's normal. But if you find an answer and immediately think, but what about this angle, or this one, or what if we flip the whole thing around? That's not overthinking. That's a brain wired for generative cognition. Psychologists describe this as fluency, the measurable ability to produce a high volume of ideas from a single prompt. It's one of the 4 core components of creative thinking identified in academic research. And it's not something most people are taught to value, because most systems only reward the first correct answer, not the 10 interesting ones after it. A conversation about traffic patterns somehow gives you an idea for a better morning routine. A documentary about ocean currents makes you rethink how you manage your energy at work. This isn't distraction. This is cross-contextual thinking, and it's one of the most studied markers of creative cognition. Research in cognitive psychology consistently shows that highly creative individuals draw from a wider associative network. Their brains don't store information in neat separate folders. Everything is loosely connected to everything else. And that loose connectivity is precisely where original ideas are born. Not what is, not what was, but what if? What if this worked differently? What if the opposite were true? What if we remove the rule that everyone assumes is permanent? To people around you, this can occasionally seem destabilizing. But to your brain, it's just the natural starting position. Psychologists call this ideational flexibility, the ability to shift perspectives and reframe problems rather than accepting them at face value. It's not rebelliousness. It's cognition, driving, washing dishes. That strange window right before you fall asleep. Neuroscientists have mapped a system in the brain called the default mode network, a network that activates specifically during rest and unstructured mental states. And here's what's remarkable. This is the same network most closely linked to moments of creative insight. Your brain isn't switching off when you step away from a problem. It's shifting into a different processing mode, one that connects information in ways focused attention sometimes can't. The shower breakthrough isn't a cliché. It's neuroscience. Ask a creative thinker to explain something complex, and they'll often reach for an analogy before they reach for a definition. This isn't imprecision. It's a different cognitive architecture entirely. Some of the most significant scientific theories in history, including fundamental ideas in physics and mathematics, were first conceived not as equations, but as mental images. The formal language came later. The feeling of the idea came first. If that's how your mind tends to work, you're not being vague. You're thinking in a mode that formal education rarely validates, but that cognitive science absolutely does. A complex situation with no clear rulebook. A project with no template. A question that nobody has quite answered yet. Where many people feel anxiety in that kind of open space, creative thinkers often feel something closer to aliveness. This isn't arrogance. Research on intrinsic motivation and creative cognition consistently shows that individuals with strong creative thinking patterns are drawn to complexity and novelty, not because they find it easy, but because their brains are wired to engage with open-ended challenges rather than shut down in the face of them. Not just opinions, feelings. An idea that excites you creates something that feels almost physical. An idea abandoned too soon leaves something that resembles genuine loss. This emotional relationship with abstract thought is well documented in creativity research. Creative thinkers don't process ideas purely as information. They process them as possibility. And possibility, to this kind of mind, carries real emotional weight. This is why creative people can seem too intense about things that others treat as purely logical decisions. It's not irrationality. It's a different relationship between cognition and emotion. Uncertainty makes many people deeply uncomfortable. The brain works hard to resolve ambiguity quickly, to close the open loop, land on a conclusion, move forward. But creative thinkers often have a genuinely higher tolerance for ambiguity, a documented cognitive trait that allows the mind to remain in an exploratory state without rushing toward premature closure. This isn't indecisiveness. It's the ability to keep a question open long enough for a genuinely original answer to emerge. That patience, uncomfortable as it sometimes feels, is one of the rarest and most valuable cognitive abilities a person can have. This one matters because it's not just a sign of creative thinking. It's a sign of what happens when a particular kind of mind grows up inside systems that weren't designed for it. Schools, workplaces, even some families, they're largely structured around linear thinking. Follow the steps. Stay in the lane. Produce the expected output. Creative minds don't naturally move that way. And the friction that creates is almost always interpreted as a flaw in the person, when it's really just a mismatch between a cognitive style and an environment that never accounted for it. If you were the kid who was smart but distracted, the employee who was talented but inconsistent, there may be more structure to what was happening than anyone around you recognized. Not because of perfectionism, not because of fear, but because your brain naturally generates alternatives. It sees the version that doesn't exist yet. It notices the gap between what something is and what it could be. This is perhaps the most quietly exhausting part of creative thinking, and also the most generative. The same mechanism that makes it hard to fully switch off is the mechanism responsible for every meaningful improvement, every unexpected solution, everything that exists now that didn't exist before someone refused to stop at good enough. Here's what cognitive science actually says about creative thinking, and what most content on this subject skips over. It is not a personality trait you're born with and either have or don't. It is not reserved for artists or musicians or people who went to the right schools. It is a cognitive pattern, a documented, measurable way that certain minds approach open-ended problems. And like any pattern, it has genuine strengths and real costs that don't get talked about enough. The restlessness, the emotional weight of unexplored ideas, the quiet exhaustion of a mind that doesn't fully switch off. Those aren't character flaws. They're the other side of the same cognitive coin. Psychologist J.P. Guilford, who formally mapped creative thinking in the mid-20th century, found that this mode of cognition operates largely independently from traditional measures of intelligence. You don't need a high IQ to think creatively. You need a brain that generates, connects, and questions, often in ways that the people around you weren't expecting. If several of these signs felt less like psychology and more like autobiography, that's worth paying attention to. Not as a label, as a lens. Because understanding how your mind actually works is almost always the first step toward using it on purpose. If this gave you language for something you felt but never quite named, share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you want to go deeper into how your brain actually processes the world, the next video is already waiting for you.